I speak now not to your achievements, but to what they are built upon. Not to the light that crowns your life, but to the subterranean soil in which that light was first planted in silence, in pain, in memory you dare not name. We begin not with triumph, but with fracture. The kind no applause can mend, the wound you no longer feel, not because it is healed, but because your psyche buried it beneath layers of adaptation and silence. It whispers through your habits, not your voice. And still, it leads. Still, it drives. You chase success not to win, but to disprove a verdict once cast in your soul. A verdict of unworthiness, of insufficiency, of being fundamentally wrong in some invisible, inescapable way. Every ambition is a cipher, a code disguising conflict, a hunger birthed not in possibility, but in deprivation. And somewhere in the shadow of every trophy there is the echo of an old humiliation, a forgotten no, a withheld touch, a gaze that never met yours with recognition. You think you desire the goal, but what you want is to reverse time, to rewrite the sentence, to be seen where once you were ignored, to be enough where once you were lacking. And the self you perform for the world, the clever self, the productive self, the charming self, it is not you. It is the scar's choreography, the mask worn not to deceive others, but to survive yourself. We become what the wound demands, strong where we were weak, loud where we were shamed, controlled where we were once at the mercy of another's chaos. But no transformation erases the origin. No success renders the past unreal. The psyche does not forget. It only transforms forgetting into ritual, into compulsions, into dreams, into symptoms, into the compulsive repetition of what was never resolved. You call it drive. I call it disguised mourning. The attempt to repair in the present what was broken in the past. But mourning cannot be skipped. It waits. It waits behind your urgency, your need to prove, your terror of stillness. There is no ambition without a crypt beneath it, no victory that does not carry within it a ghost. What you built was not a dream but a defense, and your achievements, they are monuments to pain. Beautiful, impressive, and yet secretly desperate. You are never chasing the future. You are running from the past. But repression is never complete. The unconscious never forgets. It returns in disguise, in conflict, in sabotage, in guilt that cannot be explained, in joy that curdles the moment it is touched. You tell yourself you want more, but what you truly crave is redemption, not public, but private. Redemption from a verdict that was never fair, from a gaze that misunderstood you, from a history that made you choose between truth and acceptance, and you chose survival. So now you survive brilliantly, but feel nothing. This is the cost of disavowing the wound, of building your life on amnesia. You gain the world and lose the thread of your own inner voice. You succeed, but only as an exile from your own depth. There is a silence beneath your words, a pause in your breath when the subject turns inward. You don't want to remember, but the body remembers. The dream remembers. The way you collapse after success, it remembers. What if I told you success is not the opposite of suffering, but its consequence? That resilience is not strength, but memory under tension. The psyche doesn't evolve toward health. It evolves toward stability. And sometimes what is stable is madness in disguise. You learn not to feel because to feel meant to be overwhelmed. You learn to achieve because being lovable without proof was never an option. You learned to please, to fix, to know, to earn because simply being was not safe enough. And now, you live behind armor that no longer fits, but to take it off would mean to feel again, and the body flinches. The mind resists, the ego defends. But somewhere within you, the wound persists, not waiting for acknowledgement, but seeking expression through symptoms and compulsions. It is only through bringing the unconscious into consciousness, through analysis and working through, that you may begin to understand its hold on you. You were made in pain, and everything you've become is a response to what was once intolerable. This is not shameful. It is human. But to live unconsciously is to mistake the mask for the face. To forget that the act of surviving something leaves its mark, and that mark does not vanish just because you've named it achievement. You think you are free, but your freedom is conditional. It depends on staying distracted, on staying ahead, on never stopping long enough to feel the ache behind your momentum. You are not merely what you do. You are the result of compromises between unconscious desires and the demands of reality. And what you had to become is brilliant. But beneath that brilliance lies a silence. And within that silence, a child still waits, not for success, but for recognition, for the unbearable truth to be named, for the lie to be exposed, that you had to earn what should have been given, that your worth was ever in question. Your pain is not weakness, it is the map. The unconscious speaks through symptoms, not words. It tells the truth, even when we lie to ourselves. It repeats until we listen. And if you look closely, you'll see your greatest wound never left you. It just changed shape, became the thing you're proudest of, the thing you defend, the thing you believe you chose. But it chose you, and it still does. To confront the unconscious is not to find comfort but coherence, to see clearly why you became who you are, not to change it, but to understand. Healing, if it exists, begins not in feeling better but in seeing more truly. So look, not outside, but in, beneath the triumph, behind the mask, under the compulsions, and you'll find it, the child you once were, the truth you once buried, and the silent, unbreakable fact that success is the child of your darkest wound. It was never about winning, it was always about being seen. And now you see. But recognition comes at a cost. The cost of dismantling everything built in the image of avoidance. The cost of remembering what the ego swore to forget. You have lived inside structures of your own making, but these walls were first raised not from ambition but from fear. Fear of being seen in your rawness, your need, your sorrow. Fear that the wound was not just a scar but your core. And so you built a palace to distract from the ruins beneath. You made yourself valuable so no one would question your worth. You performed certainty to protect the confusion that once tore through you like fire in an empty room. This is not your fault, but it is your inheritance. The unconscious never deals in fairness. It deals in necessity. It encodes what cannot be tolerated and hides it in behavior, in repetition, in subtle betrayals of the self. You think you are choosing freely, but your freedom is rehearsed, conditioned, structured by ancient compromises made in moments you can no longer remember. Each choice echoes with the voice of a parent, a silence, a gaze, a cry, and you obey, not knowing you are still obeying. You learned early that being too much would cost you love, that your needs could shame others, that your anger could break the fragile bonds you depended on. So you buried it all. Not just the rage, but the joy too, because to feel fully is to risk everything. And now you wonder why intimacy feels impossible, why connection feels unsafe, why love cannot land. You wonder why success is so hollow. It is because you live divided. You split off the parts of yourself that once endangered belonging. And in doing so, you became someone admirable, but not whole. The world rewards this fracture. It praises the persona that never complains, that delivers, that sparkles while suffering in silence. And so, your wound becomes invisible even to you. But the psyche keeps score. It returns in the form of exhaustion that no sleep cures, in the sabotage you can't explain, in the numbness that descends even in moments of joy, in the strange feeling that you are living someone else's life. This is the unconscious calling, not as a threat, but as a reckoning, a demand that what was split must be seen, that what was disowned must be welcomed back into your psychic home, not to be indulged, but to be understood. You will resist this. Every part of you trained for survival will rise in protest. It will tell you to keep moving, to keep succeeding, to keep numbing, to never look down, but downward is the only way. Into the abyss of memory, into the cold places where your voice was once taken from you, into the truth that you were not only shaped by love, but by its absence. Grief waits there, not as weakness, but as fidelity. Fidelity to the child who once felt too much. Fidelity to the truth that you should not have had to adapt so violently. Fidelity to what was real. And only through that grief can you reclaim what was exiled. The rage that once protected your soul, the tenderness that once hoped, the joy that once danced before shame locked it away. This is not a journey of transcendence, but an uncovering of the unconscious conflicts that have governed your life. Only when you descend into these repressed memories can you begin to untangle their grip and allow the ego to gain mastery over them. That wound speaks now, in your ambition, in your fatigue, in your silence, in your brilliance. To meet it is not to be destroyed, but to be reunited with what you lost, yourself. Not the self you became for others, but the self that once burned with life before the world said no. Do not confuse this with healing. Healing suggests a clean break, a happy ending. The psyche knows no such thing. It knows only layers, repetition, compromise, and beneath it all, the timeless pulse of what was never allowed to speak. Let it speak now, not in words, but in memory, in breath, in tremble, in the sudden wave of tears that come with no name. That is truth rising. That is the unconscious blooming through the cracks in your persona. That is the price of wholeness. You thought success would save you, but nothing saves us from the past except our willingness to face it. And when you do not once, but again and again, you begin to feel something unfamiliar. Not relief, not pride, but presence. You begin to inhabit your own life, not as a performance, but as a recognition. The wound is not gone, but it is no longer your secret master. And in that shift subtle, searing, you are no longer merely succeeding, you are remembering. And in remembering, you become someone success could never make you. You become real. But reality, once touched, has its own violence. It does not flatter. It does not soothe. It does not confirm the stories you've told to make the pain make sense. It strips away the narrative until all that is left is the raw, unbearable fact. This happened. You were unseen. You were unmet. You were left to assemble a self out of fragments, a life out of compensations, and still you rose. But not unscarred, never unscarred. The scar is the architecture of your success, not a metaphor, not a flourish. The literal psychic blueprint of your ambition. You worked because not working meant feeling. You mastered because not mastering meant remembering. You achieved because the silence of stillness was too loud with ghosts. So your hands stayed full. Your mind stayed ahead. Your calendar stayed bloated. And beneath it all, something wept. But the psyche does not run on time. It does not forget because you succeeded. It waits. It waits until you are too tired to distract, until the applause grows quiet, until the goals have all been met, and still the hunger remains. And in that silence it returns. The old ache, the unspoken cry, the self you buried beneath your competence. You think this is regression. It is not. It is the return of the repressed, not to punish you, but to be known. The unconscious does not seek revenge, it seeks recognition. It speaks in symbols and slips in dreams, in anxiety. It will sabotage your joy only to remind you that something in you has not yet been touched by compassion, that some part of you is still trapped in a room with no windows, repeating a story that never found its end. This part of you, the abandoned self, does not want perfection. It wants truth. It does not need you to succeed. It needs you to stop running, just long enough to turn inward and say, I know, I remember, I see you now. This is not a sentimental act. It is the labor of uncovering and analyzing the defenses that once kept you safe, but now limit you. The ego will resist. It will mock the softness, belittle the memory, discredit the emotion. Because to feel again is to risk chaos. And your ego was built to prevent chaos at all costs. Even if that cost is your aliveness. You mistake this numbness for peace. It is not peace. It is suppression. You've simply become better at pretending that the ache no longer moves you. But it does. In every relationship you sabotage, in every dream you abandon, in every joy you cannot hold. The ache lives on. So now comes the confrontation, not with the world, but with the self that kept you safe, and in doing so, made you a stranger to yourself. You must ask, what did I kill off in the name of stability? What part of me was too tender, too wild, too much, and had to be silenced? And if you are honest, you will find it. You will find the child who laughed too loud, the teenager who wanted too much, the adult who collapsed after every success because joy felt dangerous. They live in you still. They are the ones who dream when you sleep, who scream when you dissociate, who cry behind your compulsions. Invite them in, not to fix them, but to finally tell the truth. I abandoned you to survive. This is the core confession, the one you've avoided all your life, because to say it is to admit that survival has a cost. That growing up meant fragmentation, that success meant forgetting, and that now, if you want to come home to yourself, you must welcome back what you once feared would destroy you. It won't destroy you. It will dismantle the falsehood, the myth of the competent self, the illusion of control. The polished ego who needs nothing, feels nothing, and wins everything. That self is exhausted. It wants to rest, but it does not know how. So rest begins in grief. In mourning the time you lost trying to become what others could love. In mourning the love that never came. In mourning the self you dismembered to be acceptable. This mourning has no ceremony, no language, only silence, and the slow recognition that what you thought was strength was often compliance, that what you called maturity was often fear, that your best qualities were shaped in the crucible of pain. This is not meant to erase your beauty, but to root it, To give it context, you are not beautiful in spite of your suffering. You are beautiful because of what your suffering forced you to become. But now, you can choose. No longer driven by the compulsion to prove. No longer haunted by the need to erase the past with achievement. You may not become whole, for the psyche is ever divided by conflicting desires and repressions. But through analysis, you can begin to understand how these inner conflicts shape you, and in this understanding, find relief from their compulsive power. It turns toward the scream rather than silencing it. You will feel terror, you will feel rage, you will feel shame, and in those feelings, you will feel alive. Because aliveness is not peace, it is not ease, it is intensity, contact, fullness, and the psyche, once split, will begin to cohere, not into something perfect, but into something real. That realness, it has no audience. It does not crave applause. It does not care how it looks. It breathes. It trembles. It speaks in fragments. But it is yours, at last. And in that reclamation, you may find a strange, terrible joy, the kind that lives in the bones, the kind that knows, I did not escape my pain. I befriended it. I did not erase my past. I made it conscious, and that is success. Not the kind they celebrate, but the kind that returns you to yourself. But the return is not triumphant. It is quiet, uneven, haunted. There is no music here, no climax to signal that you have arrived. Only a stillness, disorienting and vast, like stepping into a room you once lived in but have no memory of decorating. The furniture is familiar, but foreign. The light hits differently now. You begin to see what you missed when you were only surviving. The small betrayals, the denied longings, the subtle gestures that once passed as love but were really conditions. You begin to see how much of your life was built to protect against this moment, this unmediated contact with what hurts and never stopped hurting. And you begin to feel shame, that old residue of childhood logic. If I suffered, I must have deserved it. If I was not loved fully, it was because I was not lovable. But this shame is not truth. It is only the story a young psyche told to make sense of chaos. A child would rather believe they are bad than admit they are helpless. It gives the illusion of control, the fantasy that if I try harder, if I become better, the pain will stop. That fantasy became your ethic, your religion, your work ethic, your charm, your armor. Now you see it for what it was, a defense, necessary, ingenious, but not permanent. You see how many of your best traits are reactions, not expressions of essence, but survival mechanisms frozen in time. And slowly the grief deepens because you begin to see just how much of your life you've lived for others, not out of generosity, but out of fear. The fear of abandonment, of being seen too clearly, of being loved without the mask. The fear that if you stop performing, the world will go quiet and no one will come. That is the wound, not just what was done to you, but what you did to yourself to make the pain make sense. The compromises, the dissociations, the exile of your own needs. And in facing this, a new kind of truth emerges. Your wound was never just inflicted. It was also inherited, passed down in silence, in looks, in unsaid rules. You carried their unspoken traumas, their unlived lives, their shame that had no name. You became the vessel, the symptom bearer, the dreamer of dreams that weren't entirely yours, and your success. It carried their longing too, to be worthy, to be seen, to matter. You were never just building a life. You were redeeming a lineage. You were rescuing ghosts. And yet, no one told you. No one explained that what you call anxiety might be memory, that what you call self-sabotage might be protest, that what you call discipline might be a kind of grief management. Because this language does not exist in the world of appearance, it only lives in the world of depth, and that world, the unconscious, is not linear. It is symbolic, repetitive, merciless. It will drag you back again and again until you listen, until you stop trying to fix and start trying to feel. And as you do, something impossible happens. The self you feared would destroy you if you let it speak begins to speak gently, not in rage, but in clarity. It says, I never wanted you to carry all this. I only wanted you to know I was here. That voice, the voice of the forgotten self, is not asking for attention. It is asking for integration. It wants to be part of your life, not to take over, but to remind you that you are more than your functions, that you have needs beyond productivity, desires beyond perfection, longings beyond approval. This is where freedom begins, not in rebellion, but in recognition. The freedom to feel without justification, to exist without performance, to speak without editing your soul. And it terrifies you, because you have spent a lifetime earning love, and this freedom offers it without conditions. Can you trust that? Can you believe that you are worthy without the striving? Can you sit in a room with your pain and not try to fix it? Can you bear the truth that your success, while beautiful, was born in response to injury? That is the ultimate recognition, not to dismiss what you've built, but to reframe it, to see the scar within the architecture, to hold both the glory and the grief, to no longer split your story into before and after, victim and victor, child and adult, to instead say, I am all of it. I am the wound and the work, the pain and the power, the brokenness and the becoming. And from here, something new becomes possible. Not escape, not closure, but continuity. A life that doesn't deny the past, but dialogues with it. A self that doesn't protect against feeling, but includes it. A success that isn't reactive, but conscious, anchored, quiet. You won't be understood by everyone. Not all will welcome your wholeness. Many are still performing their roles, still afraid of the mirror, but you will know. And in that knowing, you will walk differently. Not faster, not louder, just more real. And in your presence, others may remember their own depth, their own silence, their own unfinished story. And maybe, one day, someone will say of you not that you were successful, but that you were honest, that you lived with your wound open, not to bleed, but to breathe, that you did not close your eyes to what hurt, but looked, and in looking, you became human, fully, without apology. But even endings are a kind of myth the psyche does not conclude. It circles, it returns. It repeats until what was denied is made conscious, until what was dismembered is reassembled in the dim light of recognition. And so this too is not an ending but a threshold, a point of contact between who you've been and who you no longer need to be. You look back and realize nothing was wasted. Not the years of striving, not the roles you wore until they wore you out, not the silence you mistook for strength, not even the nights you collapsed under the weight of your own excellence. Every moment contained a signal, every symptom a message, every conflict a clue. The unconscious was never against you, only misunderstood. It did not want your destruction. It wanted your return. And now, stripped of pretense, of narratives, of polished ambition. You stand as something more dangerous and more sacred than success. You stand as someone who knows, someone who has touched the wound and refused to look away, someone who carries pain not as a secret but as a signpost, as a portal back to what matters. This is not a story of healing. That word is too clean, too final. This is a story of living with the contradiction intact, of holding your greatness in one hand and your grief in the other, and no longer needing one to erase the other. It is the story of staying awake, of letting the silence speak, of no longer negotiating with your truth, because you finally understand your darkness was never the opposite of your light. It was its cradle. Your ache was not the enemy of your gifts. It was the source. Your longing was not shameful. It was the compass. Everything you became was born of that first rupture. And still you made a life. Still you built something real. Still you endured. And now, finally, you belong to yourself. Not because you triumphed over the past, but because you welcomed it home. So let the world call it success. Let them admire the shine. But you will know the soil it grew from, the nights it cost you, the memory it preserved, the child it still carries forward. You will know without the need to explain, without the need to be seen, that success is the child of your darkest wound. And in owning that fully, you are no longer its prisoner. You are its author.